Okay, grade 10s, let's do this now. So if you remember yesterday, I was busy going through the PowerPoint about line diagrams of root stems and leaves, and there were a few things that I left out, okay, because that was just too much for them. So I want to have a look at those now before I show you my line diagram models. Okay, so if you look at this PowerPoint again, remember we're still building up the understanding and the picture of the different plant organs. And you'll remember me saying, if we look at a cross-section of a root, okay, the water passes through the root hair of the epidermis and even just through the normal epidermis. But these root hairs increase the surface area for absorption of water, and they're only about 1 millimeter long. They're really not that big. Okay, and then across the parenchyma cells of the cortex, and then through this layer of cells. Now that layer of cells is known as the endodermis. So they've colored them in blue, but then they've got this red band around them. So I'm going to explain that just now. And then the next ring of cells is known as the pericycle. Pericycle are the meristematic cells that undergo mitosis to make branch roots. And I'll show you on the line diagram just now. Then you've got the parenchyma, the phloem the phloem in between the arms of the xylem. So imagine the water moving across. So let's go to the next page. Okay, so here the water is absorbed by the root hairs. It moves across the parenchyma by osmosis from cell to cell. So from low water concentration in the soil to the root hair becomes high water concentration. To the next cell, which is a low water concentration, becomes high. To the next was low, becomes high. Across, and eventually through this layer of cells called the endodermis, through the pericycle, and the water is actually directed into the xylem. And in fact, some of the cells here, they pump out, the cells pump out salt so that water follows. Because if you eat something salty, you want water. Now, this diagram's got a little bit too much detail, and in fact, in your textbook on page 83, it's got some of that detail as well. All right, so there's a table showing how water moves across roots. Now, it says apoplastic. So like here, apoplast, that the water passes through. It's the main way that water passes through root cells because, you know, cell walls are permeable. It's very easy for them to take the shortcuts and pass through and into the xylem. Then you've got what we call the symplastic movement of water, where the water goes into the vacuole, into the cytoplasm, through cell wall, cell membrane, cytoplasm, cell wall, cell membrane, etc., and into the middle of the root. And then in your textbook, it talks about the vacuolar root. So it would go through root hair, cytoplasm, vacuole. They haven't really shown it here. Vacuole, next cell, through cytoplasm, vacuole, cytoplasm, cell walls, cytoplasm, vacuole, cell wall, and so on. So that's called the vacuolar root. And it's just different ways in which water moves from the outside of the root, across the cortex, and to the xylem. Please, people, don't go and learn that. Okay, I don't think it's necessary. But what you can see here, which is quite nice, is that there are air spaces between the parenchyma cells. And you might remember that plant cells communicate with one another by these little tunnels of cytoplasm between the cells, and those were known as the plasmodesmata. So there's one plasmodesma. There are two plasmodesmata, little channels of cytoplasm between the cells, allowing for transport of proteins and sugars and things like that. Okay, they're holding hands. All right, so please don't learn the detail of the table on page 83, but one thing I want to point out, these endodermal cells over here, we go back again. All right, so there they are. Now I've got a blackboard duster here. There it is. So you've got to imagine that that's the cell through which the water passes through, then out the other side and into the xylem. Watch here. So through the middle of the cell, out the other side and into the xylem on the next picture. Okay, so what are these funny little things on the side here? They are known as the Casparian strips. They are made up of a fatty substance. So if the cell wall has got a fatty substance in it, it's going to force the water to go through the middle of the cell and out the other side. And like I said, salts are often secreted on the side of the xylem, so water is enticed to go through the cell and into the middle of the root where the xylem is. But now what this fat, okay, let me just take it off share. So there's my blackboard duster. So that's a, got all things written on it. Okay, now that's the cell, and then it's got a cell wall all over, right? So here's cellulose, there's cellulose, but there's this Casparian strip which goes around the outer edges of the cell, the fatty layer. So when the water moves across the parenchyma cells by osmosis from cell to cell, it then is forced to go through the middle of the cell and out the other side and into the xylem. So it can't go there, then across to the neighboring cell, or here and then this way, or here and then up and back. All right, it's almost like it's being channeled by this fatty layer in the cell, the cell wall, not all the cell walls, just these 4 cell walls of the endodermal cell to make sure that water passes through. So if you look at your textbook on page 83, it says once the water reaches the endodermis, the inside skin of the plant root, it is forced to move through the protoplast, so through the living contents of the cell, through the cell wall, through the living contents in the middle, and then out the cell wall on the other side. All right. Endodermal cell walls contain the Casparian strip, which is impermeable to water. It's fatty. It's not going to allow water to pass through that part. And the endodermal cells secrete salts into the vascular tissue, the xylem and the phloem on this side. So therefore, water is enticed to move down a concentration gradient from the parenchyma cell through the endodermal cell. That's now got a high water concentration to the parenchyma cells on this side and then eventually into the xylem. All right, so that's just explaining how that works. So if you look here again, all right, so there is the endodermal cell, okay? There's part of the Casparian strip. You can't see it all the way around because they've cut through the cell. So you can see how the water is directed, no matter how it passes across the root, through the cytoplasm, through the cell, vacuoles of cells, or very easy through the cell walls. It's always enticed to go through the endodermal cells, through the pericycle where the branch roots are made, and into the xylem. Okay, now there's one more thing. Okay, so now what we're going to do, what I've done is I've actually put the model answer for these line diagrams in the actual PowerPoint, and I'll upload the separate model answer as well. So I've now labeled this, okay, and I've added a few extra things. So on the outside is the epidermis. Now, only near the tip of the root would there be unicellular root hairs, but further back on the older parts of the root, this pericycle layer, that meristematic layer, I've drawn some small cells there. That's the pericycle. The cells divide to produce branch roots. So lots of cell division takes place and lots of roots are produced. And eventually these big branch roots stick out to stabilize the root and to anchor it and to absorb more. You know, they have their own root hairs and then more water will be absorbed. And this plant can become a really, really big tree or a little, little plant, whatever. All right. So I've got epidermis, okay, unicellular root hairs, and we've talked about branch roots. Okay, this whole, that's the main root. Then the water passes across the cortex of parenchyma. It looks like bubble wrap. There are air spaces between the cells. Then it's directed through the endodermal cells, through the pericycle, because these endodermal cells secrete salt into this side, so the water follows to the more salty area and eventually into the xylem cells. So I've drawn the xylem tissue with xylem vessels near the middle and xylem tracheids, smaller tracheids forming the arms of the star. There's the phloem. So the phloem will transport sugars up or down, depending on, it's coming from the leaves down, being stored in the root, goes back up to the leaves or the flowers so that they can grow, etc. But xylem transports water up the root from cell to cell against gravity through the vessels, through the xylem tracheids, all the way up. All right, and filling up in between the xylem and the phloem, you can see there's parenchyma. So I've drawn some parenchyma, but not with such big air spaces, bigger air spaces over here. And I think I've covered everything. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop this video because I don't want it to be long so that you can now catch up and have a look at this. And then I'm going to do the stem with secondary thickening, and then I'll make another little video to go over the leaf line diagram.